So second assumption is that weakness of hip and knee and ankle. In that also we focus so much on knee control or knee flexor control as a cause. If you assume that circumduction is poor because quadriceps are overacting or hamstring are weak, so the common tendency you teach them hip knee flexion or you teach hamstring strengthening either in supine, prone or in different position. You strengthen the hamstring and you try to work on the hamstring. But normal biomechanics of gait tells us that actually we do not require so much of hamstring in swing. We only require hamstring during terminal swing where you have to check action of the quadricep from preventing going too much of tibia forward movement. So the hip knee flexion or the swing movement in the lower limb is not caused by the hamstrings or knee flexor, but it is caused by something else. Okay, and that's something else. The biomechanical, the newer concept tells us that it is caused mainly because of hip flexion, and I have explained very well in detail in our gait lecture, Gait Med Easy. There I have explained how hip flexion causes the pendular action, or the more you do the flexion of hip, knee automatically gets into flexion. So if you really want to improve the knee flexion, instead of working isolatedly on the knee flexion, I suggest better work on hip and knee flexion or work on more of hip flexion. Like when I do training, I focus on hip knee flexion more than knee flexion. Or sometimes people do only hip flexor strengthening. And in terms of hip flexor strengthening, what is the common hip flexor strengthening exercise is being given? It is the SLR in supine. Now, the moment you do the SLR in supine, what happens? What is the position of knee? Knee is extension. Knee is in extension. Knee is in extension. So, which muscle are working? Your rectus is overacting there. So, if you are really working on hip flexor, please work hip flexor with knee flexion, not isolated hip flexion. Or if you really want to work on hip flexion, work in sitting, where you are getting hip and knee flexion together. So this action will give more of hip and knee flexion combined compared to the SLR. So the point is that I strongly condemn use of SLR in hemiplegia. The typical SLR exercise which we commonly give as a normal exercise in our orthopedic population, probably there it might be beneficial. I don't know about orthopedic type of rehabilitation, but in neuro, I do not suggest you should do SLR type of strength training exercise in lower limb. If you really want, you can do hip knee flexion. Is very good exercise for improving the swing phase or improving the hip and knee control in supine. Or you can work in hip knee flexion in sitting or in standing also. When you are working here, hip knee flexion, usually people teach knee flexion like this in the standing position. This is very difficult in our hemiplegia. Instead of that, you can teach hip knee flexion as an exercise, but again, it is an exercise. You don't need to do. We don't require so much of hip knee flexion in normal gait. So teaching us so much of high degree of hip flexion will not solve our gait problem. If your objective to do the hip flexor and knee flexor strengthening, I agree. If your objective to strengthen hip, knee, and dorsiflexor, I agree. But if your objective is to improve swing phase in the gait, then it is questionable. So we don't require so much of hip knee flexion in swing in a normal gait. Like if you assume if there is too much of plantar flexor overactivation or plantar flexor spasticity is the cause, or dorsiflexor weakness is the cause of circumduction. So common traditionally what we used to do, we used to do a lot of plantar flexor stretching or lengthening, or we do a lot of dorsiflexor strengthening by either using EMS, neuromuscular electrical stimulation and getting dorsiflexion, or we try to do some traditional technique for assisting the dorsiflexion in supine, or hip deflection and then dorsiflexion in supine to facilitate dorsiflexor and stretching of the plantar flexor. If reducing the spasticity in the plantar flexor is also one of the common objective. So we use a lot of cone inhibiting postures to reduce the plantar flexor spasticity. So all these treatments are based on the physiology that there is a problem in the body. Like there can be overactivation or weakness is the common assumption. So traditionally, if you understand in motor control concept, if you look at this triangle, this is the motor control triangle, motion control triangle. There is individual, environment, and task. So whole this neurophysiological assumption where it is talking about in this triangle, it is only talking about the I quadrant, which is the individual quadrant. And in individual also, there is too much of importance given to what part, which is the brain or the nervous system. So in this whole assumption, traditional assumption, we are given so much of importance to the brain and the nervous system, we forgot about other system. So what does the system theory of motor control tells us? That it is not only nervous system is only important, but there are also other systems which are involved, and system theory says it is a interaction of multiple systems together produces the muscle control or movement. So we need to understand traditionally we have been given so much of importance to the central nervous system, and do we need to give so much importance in real life? And if we solve that problem, do we actually solve the problem? Because we are only sorting one part of the system. So system theory says it is not only the nervous system is more important, but the musculoskeletal system is also important. Your cognition is also important. Your perception is also important. Your cardiovascular fitness is also important. So there are a lot of multiple systems are integrating together to produce a movement. So first of all, I suggest take your problem away from this and then try to focus something else also. Now, neurophysiologically, we thought the cause is weakness, spasticity, loss of control, and if you think that is the cause, then the common problem or solution is that you solve the problem. So, can I solve the problem instantly or in long run too much, or you can completely solve the weakness problem or loss of control in nervous system? Probably no, because it is an injured brain, it is a hemiplegic brain. There is loss of control. We may get some improvement, we may not get some improvement. So there is a probability is there, because we are trying to solve the problem which is not in our control, or it will take too much of time to control. Same is for spasticity. We can alter it, but we cannot control too much. Loss of control, it depends on a lot of factors. So we are trying to correct the problem which are actually not so much in our control and which has a limited scope of improvement, and multiple factors are getting involved. So why don't we change our assumption? What if we change the assumption from the nervous system, from solving directly to the loss of control or loss of weakness or increase in spasticity to something else, and analyze the same circumvention problem with another mindset, another perspective, and move a little bit from the nervous system, because in nervous system there is a limited scope, or even if there is a scope, we require too much of training and time. What if we find some other alternative methods? What if we find some other alternative assumption? What are different causes for some dysfunction? And if we treat that, what is the scope of improvement? So this is a part 2 of the lecture. I am trying to take away you from central nervous system to something else, and we'll analyze the same problem with a different, different perspective. And here I will give least importance to the central nervous system or the brain also. So the second system, we have talked about system theory of motor control. We'll move a little bit from the system theory of motor control with the dynamic system theory of motor control. Here I am going to use 2-3 theory combined. One is system theory of motor control, second is dynamic theory of motor control, third is motor program theory of motor control. So and some principles of motor learning and motor control will be combining, and we are going to apply here. As a therapist, first of all, I consider myself instead of a living organism or typical organism which is being controlled by a brain, I take myself as a mechanical model. A typical mechanical model which is being basically, suppose this is like a typical mechanical model which is a combination of different segments, like this is one segment, this is second segment, third segment, trunk is a segment, pelvis is a segment, head is a segment. So it is a complex interaction of multiple segments physiologically. Okay, look at the if you have seen or if you have played with any toys which kids play where they have the robots which walks like this. So if you see how does the robots which the kids play, there is a mechanical action. There is something goes forward, something goes backward, something goes forward, something goes backward, and that is how the typical robots goes forward or walks forward. Or the quadrupedal animal also, if you see something goes forward, something is go backward, and there is a mechanical reaction there. Like this is pulled back. There is a linkage there which moves like this in the body of that particular toy. So how can we do that with us? Now I use the word for something goes forward, something goes backward. Okay. But in hemiplegic, when we are talking about something goes forward, what is going backward? Are we thinking about that? So, if you want this to go forward, how much is something is going backward? We never think about that. Now, let us understand the same concept if something goes forward and something goes backward. How does our hemiplegic walk? My right side is my hemiplegic side. So, this is how I stand and I walk. Now, if you see, if I want to take this forward, anything is going backward? Nothing is going backward on the this side. Right side is want to go forward. Something was supposed to go backward, but nothing is going backward. Everything is forward. So obviously, it's by mechanics. If something has to go forward, something has to go backward. But that is not happening. Not only that, look at this. Suppose I am walking like this. When in normal pattern, this goes forward, this goes backward, upper limb, and the opposite hand goes forward. How does our hemiplegic walk? Does the upper limb is going backward naturally, or does this hand going forward naturally? No. Does there is a typical cyclic mechanism happening in the lower limb? No. So where is the cause? You have to understand it as a mechanical model. Okay, so mechanically there is no this type of reaction happening. Or when he goes straight forward, there should be like this mechanism where the opposite leg is going backward. It doesn't happen. So something is wrong there. So probably we have to correct that. And how do we do that? First problem is that. Second, what do you think is a swing and stance as a mechanical model? For me, what is swing is that I shorten my leg. Hip flexion, it is technically shorten my leg so that I take a step easily or I don't drag the leg, I do the foot clearance. So by doing swing or trying to do the foot clearance, what is the objective of foot clearance? If you remember our gate lecture, gate made is easy. In that we talked about what is the purpose of the gate is to do the foot clearance and don't do the drag. So if for doing foot clearance, what are we doing mechanically by doing hip deflection? We are shortening the leg. So how do I shorten the leg in normal population? One option, you cut the leg and you shorten it. What is the second option? You increase the length of the opposite leg. So if I increase the length of the opposite leg, that will also help you in doing the swing phase very easily. And people with hemiplegia, they do sometime on their own, or you must have seen in this type of manipulations or compensatory mechanism in polio cases. So if I want to increase this length, what are the options I got? मुझे पास में ऊपर से इसको आगे मेरा फुट देखना है थोड़ा सा चीज ऊपर से और now you can see it. Okay, so I'm standing here. When I'm clearing the foot, what am I doing? I'm shortening. So what is the option of shortening? Either you improve hip deflection or you can increase the length of the opposite leg. And how can I increase the length of the opposite leg? One of the simple method is you do the vaulting. So lot of patients with hemiplegia do the vaulting. What is vaulting? They increase the height of the leg by doing plantar flexion on opposite side. And by doing plantar flexion on opposite side, they can take the step. This way also, vaulting will shorten the leg, and those people who walk with vaulting, they don't do so much of circumflexion gait. But only people who got good stability, good balance, they only can do the vaulting and then walk. If you got a trunk control and good tone in the trunk and hip and leg. Second option, we can increase the height. Can you get me shoes or something? So, if you can't increase the height, give a shoelace on the opposite side. So, if I get a shoelace on the opposite side, like this is my shoe on the left leg, normal shoe is heel is half inch to 1 inch. So, by giving a shoelace, I am mechanically getting shortening here of half inch to 1 inch, and I don't require circumflexion because right now the clearance is happening because my only objective was to do the foot clearance. If there is no too much of plantar flexor tone, you can start training like this in the beginning where you can do the foot clearance. Make sense? Now we got the foot clearance, so we solved the swing phase. We'll come back to the previous problem. Something goes forward, something has to go backward. Now here, because I can do the foot clearance easily, I can step this leg forward. What is happening here? I am restoring the previous mechanism of going backward something. So you get a good step length here. So if you are getting a good step length on both the side, you are restoring back to the previous pattern. Okay. Second, this shoelace is only given for a short period of time, just to teach them stepping or walking forward or moving from one place to another. Again, remember one of the purpose of the gait, which we talked about gait medicine. First, we should focus on the purpose of gait, moving from one place to another. It doesn't matter how to do it in the beginning, but we have to learn how to move from one place to another. And if you remember our last lecture about clinical application of neurology, you have to talk about knowledge of result. The person has to understand what is walking, how to walk from one place to another, how to move from one place to another, because these people have lost that memory. So if you give a knowledge of control, knowledge of result by getting that movement, you will automatically able to restore that average stepping pattern or normal stepping pattern with the shoelace. When I am doing this, you can see that there is an increase in height and reduction in the height. And I am doing easy foot clearance. But there is no scope of now we need to do the circumduction. Imagine I am doing shoelace and then circumduction. I will become more unstable and I may not be able to do that. So instantly, if somebody is doing too much of circumduction, give a shoelace and let him walk with this. Again, we'll go to the lecture of neuroplasticity clinical application. One of the principle: use it or lose it. So here, because I am not doing circumduction very much with the shoelace, I am losing the circumduction concept, or the motor control of typical circumduction is getting slowly down. So we are not allowing the occurrence of circumduction by giving the shoelace in the initial phase. Make sense?